Hello, my name is Ian, and Phil and I would like to welcome you to our presentation. Today we'll be looking at the project management functionality, which is an add-on to the Priority ERP system. Before we start, there are a couple of points to mention. Firstly, there are brochures to view and download using the webinar menu. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Either type your question directly, or if you prefer to speak, raise your hand and you'll be unmuted to ask a question. Please fill out the survey that will be sent out after the webinar so that we know how to improve for next time. And finally, please visit our webinar site to view previous webinars, upcoming webinars, and make suggestions on what you'd like to see in future presentations. The address is webinar.meditechuk.com. Okay, let's move on, starting with the Priority ERP system. Priority ERP is a comprehensive, integrated business management solution. It is used daily in over 8,000 organizations across 40 countries. Surpassing our 1,500th cloud customer in March this year, there are now 300,000 satisfied Priority ERP users worldwide. Every day, 18 million transactions are carried out using Priority. The core system offers a wide breadth of functionality in its own right, and this can be further extended and enhanced with the addition of specific functional modules. As you can see, there are a number of additional modules such as warehouse management, customer service, and human resources. However, today our focus is on project management. Our project management module has been specifically developed to help manage all aspects of the project lifecycle and supports task independencies within or between projects. From one central location, we can manage the scope of work and associated documentation, plan the required resources, and produce a full bill of materials with the relevant costs and timelines. Project tasks and costs are then updated real-time with activity-related reporting of labor and expenses. The live ongoing status of the project can be viewed using editable dashboards or various BI tools. Priority offers built-in tools for loading and synchronizing all the documentation used to organize project activities and materials. Any documents such as specifications, drawings, PDF files, and so on can be stored in the system with an assigned user. Inevitably, the initial scope will be updated and modified a number of times before the start of the project. This process is fully documented within Priority with full revision control and audit trail. Once the scope of work is agreed, we can move on to project planning and resource management. Resource availability can be viewed using the resource calendar. This allows us to manage both internal and external resources, such as subcontractors. With full MS project integration, we're able to produce resource load simulation and load views. Okay, we have the scope of work, we have a resource plan. Now we can move on to create a full bill of materials and begin the procurement process. As we build up the BOM, we're able to start allocating projected costs to the various phases. Project timelines are developed with advanced interdependencies, and then as the project gets underway, activities, materials, and labor are reported in real time. This allows us to produce Gantt charts showing baseline versus actual project dates and track any issues. The status can also be viewed using the BI tools and dashboards or the many reports provided within the system. Project invoicing is also managed and is totally integrated with Priority financials. Okay, that's the theory. Now let's have a look at Priority and project management in action. Obviously, we can't cover every function in this brief introduction, but we can give you an overview of some of the key capabilities. I'd like to hand over to Phil Nichols, who is the Managing Director of Meditech UK. Please bear with us while we switch over to the live system.
Right, good afternoon everybody. Thanks for coming along and watching and listening to this webinar for project management. As Ian said, project management is quite a large module, and it is very much an integrated part of the whole of Priority. So there are little bits and pieces we probably won't show. For instance, I'm not planning on going and looking at scope of work, for instance, and a lot of the resource scheduling, etc., is just an integrated part of Priority, and a lot of resource scheduling is available throughout the rest of the system anyway. So I'm just going to concentrate today on the major aspects of the project management, and really this is mainly about looking at the project form. Okay, so I have a project up on the project form at the moment, and we'll be running through this just to look at some of the main features of it. So clearly, projects can be allocated or identified against a particular customer. Anyone who is familiar with Priority will know that any fields with a red asterisk against it is a mandatory field, and of course any of the fields on the system can be made mandatory if required. So we have a customer number. That doesn't mean this has to be an external project. It could of course be an internal project, internal R&D project. In this particular case, we're looking at an external project, which of course will be billable. Once entering the project description, then the document numbering templates will produce an automatic project number for you. You can identify project managers and project supervisors for each of the individual projects, and as with most of the transactions in Priority, there of course is also a status field which determines the life cycle of the project. Various categorizations of the project are available, so you've got a project type and an additional classification, and clearly you can also identify who the contacts are in your customer's organization who's dealing with this project. The dates of the project, so when it's opened and when it's installed, the first will automatically be generated, and you can enter the second one, and clearly you can identify whether this is a billable entity or not. A number of other parameters around here with regards to some of the defaults and the standards for the project. So if if your people have got to travel to site and they're going to be claiming mileage and travel time, then we can set the defaults for those, so that when they claim that on their expenses, it'll come through as the standard defaults values. We also, of course, very importantly, need to see what's the planning for this project is all about. So cost-wise, what are the material costs, what are the labour costs, and what is the planned price for the project. Therefore, out of that, we can also calculate what your planned profit is. You'll also see that there is version control within the project, so you can set baselines and have as many different versions of the project as it goes through its life cycle, and clearly this then enables you to save those older versions and also run reports to compare the different versions against each other. And equally importantly is you can identify the Microsoft project file. Now this works both ways, so you can create a project in Microsoft Project and then upload it into Priority for all of the cost management of the project. But equally, when you have a project in Priority, you can download it at will to Microsoft Project for the generation of a Gantt chart. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the lower levels of this, so looking into the detail, because one of the things about the planning here is you can see these are all greyed out fields, so I couldn't change them here even if I wanted to. That's because all of these figures are being calculated from lower levels. So let's start off first of all with the project planning tab. Here you can see each of the individual activities of the project are identified, and each is identified with a work breakdown structure code. So Priority recognizes work breakdown structures, recognizes the different levels of them, and this is important because the lower level costs then get accumulated into the higher levels, as you can see in some of the cost fields over to the right. Clearly you can type in whatever name of the activity you wish. It is possible, of course, to where organizations are very project orientated and everything they do is to do with projects, the chances are they will have templates, and you can set up a project template and copy this into new projects as they as they get created. There is, of course, a start and end date for every single one of your activities, and each of them can be identified as being a milestone activity as well. The beauty of this is that you can have individual payments allocated to specific activities, so that when that particular activity is complete, 100% complete, then the automatic invoicing routines in the background can then kick in. It'll look around all of the different projects, look for any milestones that have been completed, and then generate any milestone payments automatically. Percentage complete column here is filled in manually by the project manager. Obviously, as he goes through the life cycle of the project, he is constantly monitoring the percentage completion of each of the different activities, and on a regular basis he can then identify what is the percentage completion at any point in time. As soon as one of these will go to 100%, then the actual end date gets automatically loaded into that adjacent field as well. Looking further across, we now have the costs of each of these activities. So we've got labour costs, material costs, total costs, and then accumulated costs from one level to another. Again, these are greyed out read-only fields because these figures still are being accumulated from lower levels. One other interesting point as well is that I mentioned about milestones and also work breakdown structure codes. There is also a capability at a lower level here of identifying for any of these activities work breakdown structures, successors and predecessors. So notwithstanding the fact that you've got a work breakdown structure, you will quite frequently have different activities that don't naturally fall one after the other in the work breakdown structure, but do succeed or precede each other. We can identify those successors and predecessors, identify lags in time between them, whether they're start to start, finish to finish, finish to start, etc., etc. So all of that capability is there. Okay, so let's have a look at one of these activities and look at a little bit more of the detail. So two main items here. First of all, we have a bill of materials for the activity. So for each of these activities, you can identify the items that need to be purchased for the fulfillment of that activity. Now, that can be done either via a purchase order or via a purchase requisition. You can see there is a field here which will determine whether it is via a purchase order or a purchase requisition, purchase demand. So we have a part number, part description, quantities, costs will come through from the part catalogue anyway, or you can put these in manually, and you can identify due dates, quantities, etc. The system will also, of course, bring through any preferred suppliers, and you'll also notice that we've got two tick boxes here, two flags, one for starting purchasing and the other one for sent to purchasing. The first one is normally ticked by the project manager at the point at which he wants to start purchasing these items for that activity. Because, of course, you do not want to purchase everything in a project on day one. You want to maintain your cash flow, so you only want to purchase items when it's appropriate for the project. So at that point, the project manager will then tick that, and the automatic routine in the background will then go around all of the different projects, identify which of these items have been ticked for purchasing, and then generate automatically either the purchase requisition or the purchase order as appropriate. Once that routine is complete, then the other tick box, sent to purchasing, will be automatically flagged by the system. You can also see in here there is a purchase authorization user and a purchase authorization date. So in this particular case, there was a purchase order that was generated and authorized, and I can come down to the lower level here and we can see what that purchase order is. There's a vendor number, purchase order number, and of course, using the normal free navigation in Priority, we can direct activate to that purchase order. And you can see here, here is the purchase order has been duly authorized by me in this particular case. Okay, so you've got complete visibility all the way through the process of everything linked with the project. Now, of course, that purchase order has now gone out to the supplier, and in due course, that will then be delivered to our goods inwards, and whoever is in goods inwards will then receive those goods into the organisation. The purchase order identifies this is linked with a particular project. The project will probably have a project warehouse, which is where the goods will be received into. That, of course, is all instructions that go to the goods receiver, so he knows exactly where to direct those goods. And the costs of those goods, because they go into a project warehouse, whatever form that is in, the costs of those goods will automatically go to the project. And we'll have a look at those costs in a moment. So that's all to do with the bill of materials for the activity. We also have a subform here for the resources for the activity, and here you can identify those man hours that will be required in order to complete this activity. Here you can see we've got a work hour part that's been identified, the number of work hours. We've obviously got a very low cost per hour for this particular type of person, but obviously these costs will then accrue up into the upper levels. You'll notice that we've got a work hour part, but we haven't identified who the employee is at this stage. At the start of a project, you will know how many hours are required, but you won't necessarily know who's going to do it. It's only when you allocate specific employees to these activities that you then get into the resource allocation and resource calendars, technician calendars, etc., which are an integral part of the main priority system anyway. Okay, moving on then. So you can see this is how all of the costs then get accrued into the activities, and then obviously from the activities they then get summed up into the top level, which is clearly where we get all of the costs for the project. If we look at some of the other subforms that we've got here, first of all, I mentioned about planning versions, and clearly we can have any number of planning versions. You could start off the project as a quotation and then go through to a baseline, and then after that a number of different iterations, depending on how many times the dear customer decides to change their mind. Secondly, we also have a subform here for payments for projects, and this is where you can identify stage payments. There are, of course, lots of ways of invoicing the customer for work on a project. Either you can do it by stage payments, you can do it by actual delivered material, by delivered services, etc. It's up to you to configure the project accordingly. But here we can see we've got a project payment that's been identified. We can also see the system has actually generated an invoice, and again I can go and look at that invoice, and we can see there the invoice for that particular stage payment. You'll notice on all of these transactions there is a project tab, and that is where the linkage back to the project is kept. Okay, so it's all very well allocating people to work on a project, but when they actually do the work, they need to report the time to the project and also their expenses as well. Within the project, you can do that here on this subform, and you can see we've got 3 people who have done that. But equally, you don't have to be inside the project in order to report your time. The project management module does have a reports of project hours and expenses form, which is separate to the project form, which is really just a timesheet, if you like, an electronic version of a manual timesheet. So somebody, as they go through their working day, working week, or whatever, can then report the work hour by hour, day by day that they've been working on. Here we also have a planning and execution tab as well. This is very important purely and simply because as you go through the project, the timeline of the project, then the project manager will want to know what the current situation is. So here we can see we've got a planned cost, which clearly agrees with what we've got in the top level. We have an actual cost, so these are the costs that the company has actually spent. This is money that's actually gone out in one form or another. Then we have projected costs, so what we have promised to pay, so for instance like purchase orders. And then we have a balance of unallocated costs. So we've not gone that far through the project so far, so not all of the cost has been allocated already. And each of these also gets broken down into different tabs here. So here we can see we've got actual costs, so we've got some purchase invoices. We've also got some reported project hours, as you saw. We could also have some expense entries, shipments to project, transfers to project warehouse, etc., etc. If you're actually manufacturing items, if you're a manufacturer as well as a project organization and you're manufacturing items for the project, then the production costs will come through to the project as well. So we've got issues to kits, we've got work order costs, production reports, labour machines, etc. And all of those costs, where they are linked to the project, will come through to here as well. And then finally, we've got the projected costs, which come in various forms, either requisitions, purchase orders, unbilled goods receipts. So for instance, when that purchase order that we looked at earlier, when that does actually get received, then that £4,500 will come through to an unbilled GRV. At the point at which we then receive the purchase invoice, and of course these are actions that are not being done by the project manager, okay, these are being done by other people within the organisation who may or may not know that they're even working on a particular project, but the system will know. And so when we receive the invoice for that goods receipt, then that 4,500 will then come back into actual costs, and it will then boost up this value here for purchase invoices. So you can see this is where the different costs associated with the project are all associated with different parts of the priority system, and so the ordinary transactions in priority are all summing up to total in the project. So as well as understanding what your costs, your planned costs, your actual costs, projected costs, and the revenue is going to be, we also need to understand exactly what the cash position is with regard to the project. So here we can see we've got a revenue of £5,000 and we've got a total cost of £8,775. So ultimately we are looking to make a profit on the project, but at this moment in time we are making a loss. Okay, so we've got minus £3,775 according to the accounts for this actual project. And these, of course, are again split into profit and loss, and then each of these are split into actual revenue, projected revenue, actual cost, and projected costs. And of course, all of the different values from the different parts of the priority system then come into play in this. Right, okay, so as a webinar, we've now been going 25 minutes. We were expecting it to be 20 minutes, so I've been talking for far too long now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to